The courtroom buzzed with the usual electricity that always seemed to hang in the air before a big case. The shuffle of papers, the soft hum of whispered speculation, the squeak of polished shoes against the tile floor. It was all routine, but no one in that room could have predicted the storm about to break. Judge Eleanor Hayes adjusted her robe, her face composed in the way only years on the bench could teach. To the gallery, she was untouchable, stern, fair, unshakable. She had presided over dozens of high-profile cases, but today was different. She just didn't know it yet. The bailiff's voice cut across the noise like a knife. The state of Louisiana versus James Carter. Eleanor glanced at the file on her bench. Assault, robbery, resisting arrest. Another grim story in a system, already overflowing with them. She exhaled quietly, bracing herself for yet another defendant who had fallen through society's cracks. But when the doors opened, her entire world tilted. Two officers escorted a man in chains into the room. His shoulders sagged, his wrists bound, his eyes fixed on the floor. Eleanor's gavel trembled ever so slightly in her hand. She knew him. It wasn't possible, and yet it was. James Carter. Not the accused, not the defendant. James. Her James. The boy who had once been her shadow. The boy who had dared her to climb trees higher than either of them should have, who had taught her to fish at the creek that separated their neighborhoods. The boy who whispered dreams to her under the magnolia tree, promising they'd always have each other's backs. And now, shackled before her, stood a man with those same unmistakable eyes, but hollowed by time, weathered by battles she had never seen. The courtroom faded around her, as if someone had pulled the oxygen from the room. She was no longer Judge Hayes. She was just Eleanor, staring at a ghost from her past. Her throat tightened, but her duty demanded composure. She forced her voice steady. "Mr. Carter, you stand accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead?" James lifted his head, and for the briefest moment, recognition flickered between them like lightning. Then he looked away. His voice came rough, gravelly from years of wear. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to demand answers. "What happened to you, James? How did you end up here?" But her face remained carved from stone. "Proceed." As the prosecution launched into their opening statement, Eleanor's mind betrayed her, pulling her back decades into the humid summers of Hammond, Louisiana. Back then, their worlds couldn't have been further apart. Eleanor's family lived in a small but neat house, white picket fence and all. James's family? A weathered wooden home at the end of a dirt road, where the porch sagged and the fields around it stretched into the horizon. But fate had a funny way of cutting across divides. They met by accident, Eleanor wandering too far into the woods behind her house, James fishing alone by the creek. His line had tangled in the reeds and she had offered to help, a simple gesture. But it grew into years of secret adventures and shared laughter. She could still hear his voice. "You ever think about leaving this place? Like really leaving? Somewhere they don't care who sits with who?" Even as kids, James saw the world with painful clarity. But Hammond wasn't forgiving. Whispers followed them. Neighbors scowled. Her father especially disapproved. Their friendship was like a fragile flame in the wind, and eventually, inevitably, the world snuffed it out. One summer evening, her father caught them on the porch. His voice had been ice. Eleanor, inside. Now. She'd hesitated, just for a second. But James, with resignation in his eyes even at 13, had whispered, "Go on, I'll see you around." She hadn't. Not really. Soon after, James's family moved. Eleanor buried herself in her studies, fueled by ambition and perhaps by guilt. She became everything her parents wanted: a lawyer, a judge, a figure of authority, but she never forgot. And now here he was. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the prosecutor declared, his tone sharp as he paced. "This case is about violence, about a man who stormed into a convenience store, attacked an innocent clerk, and fled with cash in hand." Eleanor's knuckles whitened on her gavel. She glanced at James. His posture was slouched, but his expression unreadable. Was it shame? Resignation? Or was it simply exhaustion from a life lived on the margins? The defense attorney rose next, Lisa Porter, young, sharp, and determined. "The prosecution will tell you this is simple, but it's not. My client has maintained his innocence from the start. The evidence will show that assumptions made that night do not hold up under scrutiny." Her voice was steady, but Eleanor caught the flicker of uncertainty in the jury's faces. The first witness, the store clerk, took the stand. He described the attacker, a man in a red hoodie, angry, aggressive, lunging across the counter. His words painted a vivid picture, but something about it rang too rehearsed. When Lisa cross-examined, she struck with precision. "You say the man wore a red hoodie. Did you see his face clearly?" The clerk shifted. "Not really. The hood was up. It was dark." Lisa's lips curved in the faintest smile. "So, to be clear, You can't definitively identify Mr. Carter as the assailant? The witness faltered. Well, no. A ripple of doubt spread through the jury box. James shifted, his back a little straighter, his hope barely visible but there. Then came the grainy surveillance footage. A shadowy figure in a red hoodie darting across the convenience store. The prosecution insisted it was James, but the quality was terrible, and Eleanor leaned forward, straining to see. The figure's features blurred into nothingness. Was this really him, or just someone who looked apart? The trial broke for lunch, but Eleanor's appetite had long vanished. Back in her chambers, her assistant Margaret tilted her head. "Judge Hayes, are you okay? You seem distracted." Distracted. That was one word for it. Torn in two was another. Should she confess she knew the defendant? Would it be unprofessional? Would it compromise the case? Eleanor swallowed hard, masking the storm behind her eyes. "I'm fine," she lied, but she wasn't. Not when her childhood best friend, her lost brother in spirit, sat on trial, his fate hanging by a thread. If you were Judge Hayes, would you reveal that you knew James, or keep it secret to protect the case? Drop your thoughts in the comments. As the afternoon session resumed, the weight in the room grew heavier. The defense and prosecution clashed, each trying to bend the narrative. Witnesses contradicted themselves. Evidence raised more questions than answers. But for Eleanor, none of it mattered more than the simple truth pounding in her chest. This wasn't just another case. This was James. And when the defense's next witness took the stand, Officer Harris, the very cop who had arrested James, the cracks in the system began to show, because his testimony would change everything. The courtroom shifted as Officer Daniel Harris took a stand. A burly man with a square jaw and the kind of swagger that screamed authority, Harris carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being believed. His uniform, crisp and neatly pressed, seemed to command respect. But Lisa Porter, James's defense attorney, wasn't about to be intimidated. She approached slowly, each step measured. "Officer Harris, you were the one who apprehended my client, correct?" "That's right," Harris replied, his tone clipped. Lisa's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you stated in your report that Mr. Carter was walking 2 blocks from the scene of the robbery when you detained him?" "Yes." "And what led you to believe he was the suspect?" Harris straightened in his seat, speaking as if reciting from a handbook. He matched the description. Black male, mid-40s, dark clothing. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Dark clothing?" "Yes." Her voice sharpened like a blade. "But the suspect in the surveillance video was described as wearing a red hoodie. Did you recover a red hoodie from Mr. Carter?" The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Harris hesitated. His jaw tightened. "No, but he could have discarded it." Lisa stepped closer, her tone laced with skepticism. "Could have? Did you or any officer search the surrounding area to locate this alleged hoodie?" "No, there wasn't time," Harris muttered. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Lisa pounced. "So, to be clear, you arrested my client based on a vague description without any physical evidence tying him to the scene?" Harris bristled, his face reddening. "I followed protocol." Lisa's smile was razor thin. "Protocol? Interesting. Did your protocol also include ignoring his protests of innocence?" Harris shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat forming at his temple. "Objection!" the prosecutor barked, badgering the witness. "Overruled," Judge Hayes said evenly, though her pulse was racing. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. Harris's credibility was slipping fast, and everyone in the room knew it. The defense wasn't done. Their next move was unexpected. Lisa introduced a forensic video analyst, an older man with round glasses who adjusted them nervously as he settled into the witness chair. He explained calmly, "Based on the proportions of the individual in the video, there is no definitive way to confirm it was Mr. Carter. Furthermore, I reviewed the metadata on the file. The timestamp has been altered." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is conjecture." "No, sir," the analyst interrupted, his voice firmer now. "This is fact. Someone tampered with the video before it was entered into evidence." Judge Hayes's heart sank. Evidence tampering. The integrity of the entire case was unraveling. For the first time, Eleanor allowed her gaze to linger on James. His eyes, those same soulful eyes from their childhood, were locked on the floor. But for the first time in days, his shoulders weren't slouched in defeat. A flicker of hope had returned. By the end of the day, Lisa had one last card to play: James himself. It was risky. Defendants rarely testify, but James insisted. He walked to the stand, chains clinking faintly with each step. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't the hardened growl of a career criminal. It was quiet, raw. "I've made mistakes in my life," James began, looking directly at the jury. "I've trusted the wrong people, gone down the wrong roads. But I didn't do this. That night, I was walking home. The cops stopped me. They didn't ask questions. They just decided I fit the bill." He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been fighting my whole life, fighting to be seen as has more than what people assume. But this is bigger than me. I just want the truth to matter. The courtroom fell silent. No shuffling papers, no coughing from the gallery, just James's words hanging heavy in the air. Judge Hayes gripped, her gavel tighter, her throat tight. This wasn't just testimony, it was a plea for humanity, and the jury felt it. She could see it in their faces. Doubt, empathy, a quiet war within them. But just when it seemed the defense was gaining ground, a shadow crept back into the room. During cross-examination, the prosecutor, Richard Powell, leaned forward with a thin smile. Mr. Carter, you claim you were simply walking home, yet your so-called alibi, a friend you say you were visiting, has refused to testify. Isn't that convenient? James clenched his jaw. He's scared. He doesn't want trouble. Powell smirked, turning to the jury. Or maybe this friend doesn't exist. Maybe you invented him to cover your tracks. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. And in that silence, Eleanor caught it. The flicker of satisfaction in Powell's eyes. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Something about this prosecutor didn't sit right. His eagerness to paint James as guilty felt too rehearsed, too desperate. Eleanor's instincts screamed at her. Was there more at play here? A hidden hand twisting the scales of justice? That night, alone in her chambers, Eleanor stared at the case file. Her pen hovered over her notes, but her mind was elsewhere. James's testimony still echoed in her ears. His voice wasn't the voice of a monster. It was the voice of the boy she once knew, the boy who had dreamed of leaving Hammond behind. She whispered to herself, her voice trembling. What happened to you, James? But she already knew the answer. The world had happened. Poverty, prejudice, a justice system too quick to condemn, and yet was she letting nostalgia blind her? Could she really trust her memories over the evidence, however flawed? Her gavel sat on the desk, polished and unyielding, a symbol of her duty, a reminder that no matter what her heart screamed, her role demanded impartiality. But for the first time in her career, Eleanor wasn't sure she could separate the two. Engagement trigger. If you were in James's shoes, would you have testified or stayed silent to avoid the risk? Let me know in the comments. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Spectators leaned forward. Reporters scribbled in frantic shorthand. The air was thick with expectation, because it was time for closing arguments, and what both sides were about to say would determine James's fate. The courthouse felt like it was breathing. Every cough, every shuffle, every heartbeat echoed off the paneled walls. Judge Eleanor Hayes adjusted her glasses as the attorneys prepared for their closing arguments. The jury looked weary, their faces pale from hours of conflicting testimony and heated cross-examinations. This was the moment that would decide everything. Richard Powell stood first. He buttoned his sleek navy suit and stepped confidently toward the jury, his voice dripping with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone sharp, "do not be distracted by theatrics. The defense would have you believe that this case is built on shadows and conspiracies. But the truth is simple. James Carter was found near the scene. He matched the description. He has a history of poor choices. And the so-called tampered video, nothing but smoke and mirrors meant to confuse you." He paced deliberately, his eyes locking with the jurors one by one. Ask yourselves this. If Mr. Carter were truly innocent, why can't he produce his alibi? Why can't he prove where he was? The answer is clear. Because he was there. He did it. And now it's up to you to hold him accountable. Powell leaned in, lowering his voice for dramatic effect. Don't let pity cloud your judgment. Justice is about facts, not feelings. He straightened, confidence radiating from his posture, then returned to his seat with a smug glance at Lisa. Lisa Porter rose slowly. Her steps were softer, but her presence filled the room. She approached the jury with a steadiness that made her words feel heavier than Powell's theatrics. "Justice," she began, her voice steady, "is not about assumptions. It is not about stereotypes. It is about truth. And the truth is, this case is riddled with holes." She held up a photo still from the surveillance video. "The man in this footage is wearing a red hoodie. My client was not. Officer Harris admitted he never found such a hoodie. He also admitted he arrested James on nothing more than a vague description." Lisa turned, her tone sharpening. "Then we learned the video, this so-called cornerstone of the prosecution's case, was tampered with. Ladies and gentlemen, if the foundation of a house is rotten, do you trust the house to stand? No, and neither should you trust this case." She moved closer, her voice lowering, drawing the jury in. "James Carter is not on trial for a crime. He is on trial for existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. The prosecution asks you to fill in gaps with your imagination. I ask you to rely only on the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. Lisa's final words were a dagger aimed at Powell. If you convict a man on assumptions, then none of us are safe. Justice demands more. Justice demands doubt. And where there is doubt, the law is clear. You must acquit. She let the silence after her words linger, then returned to her seat. The jurors were led out. The courtroom buzzed with low whispers, tension curling through the air like smoke. James sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly, knuckles pale. Lisa whispered something to him, but he barely heard. His gaze was locked on Eleanor. For hours, the jury deliberated. Time stretched endlessly. Eleanor remained composed on the bench, but inside she was unraveling. Each tick of the clock pulled her further back into her memories. James laughing under the streetlight, James promising he'd escape Hammond, James's voice on the stand begging for truth. But she also heard the echo of Powell's words. Don't let pity cloud your judgment. Which voice would the jury listen to? Finally, the bailiff announced, "All rise." The jury filed in, their expressions unreadable. James's chest rose and fell rapidly. Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Powell sat tall, smug confidence radiating from him. The foreman stood. He held a folded slip of paper, his hands trembling slightly. In the matter of the state versus James Carter, the world seemed to stop breathing. We, the jury, find the defendant. A pause so long it stretched into eternity. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries. Relief poured from James in a shuddering exhale, his hands covering his face. Lisa gripped his shoulder, smiling through tears. But as the room exploded with emotion, Eleanor's eyes weren't on James. They were on Powell, because while the jury's words rang out like thunder, Powell's face twisted into something else. Not shock, not disappointment, fear. For a brief, flickering second, she saw it. His mask slipped, and she knew, deep in her bones, that he hadn't been seeking justice at all. He had been protecting something or someone. The bailiff banged for order. James was released, unshackled, a free man. He turned, his eyes locking on Eleanor's. For a heartbeat, they were kids again. Two souls bound by the same streets, the same struggles. And in that look, Eleanor understood what she had to do. This trial wasn't the end. It was the beginning. If evidence had been tampered with, if Powell had manipulated the system, then the rot ran deeper than James Carter. Eleanor's duty wasn't just to preside over this case, it was to uncover the truth. They thought it was over when the verdict was read. But justice isn't just about a single trial. Sometimes the fight only begins when the gavel falls. Do you think Judge Eleanor should investigate Powell and risk her career, or stay silent and protect her seat on the bench?